Ritchie's the trigger.
So why do we need 0 year?
Well, because if they never trigger at all, we need to have the road sometime. And I just,
you're allowing indefinite extensions.
if we don't need the road, this really is broader than what they're asking for if we don't need the road.
Yeah, but if you're, I like being picky on the dates, that's just me. But I would also not prefer, I don't want indefinite extensions either.
Well, they're not, okay, they're not
Our city
indefinite.
master plan for the roads.
In 2019, they come before the council. If we don't think we need the road, we give them another year. In 2020, in early spring, they come before the council. If we don't need it, we give them another year. And maybe 5, 6 more times. It isn't indefinite. The council sits on the decision every year.
Again, we're giving an incentive to Wasatch Ritchie to not develop, I think. We're giving them an incentive to wait because you're going to have to rely on them, so to speak. And then we're tying two developers together again, where we're having problems with two developers, being tied together.
But it seemed to me that we had agreement with us and with Todd that why build a road that isn't needed, a road to nowhere. And so until Wasatch Ritchie will come when they want their development. If they don't come ever, then this starts to say, well, we still need to maybe have the road.
Maybe.
Okay? But it also gives us the flexibility to give Red Ledges another year, 2 or 3 or 4 if nothing's happening with Wasatch Ritchie.
So you're saying there aren't indefinite extensions?
No. It goes to 2019, and if there isn't a trigger because of Wasatch Ritchie, then they meet before us, and we give them certainty before the construction season whether they've got another year or not, or another year or not.
Year-by-year basis, and each year thereafter to finish. Okay, but where's the final deadline?
Well, there isn't one in this. You can amend it and add it. I'm saying, why do we need a road till we don't have anywhere for it to go?
Is there any way we can do some kind of a traffic study included in this to, prove the need, not just the trigger road?
When we meet, we have the trigger, and I think it needs to be in there because whenever it comes, we need to know. But we get to look at it as city council. If you want to do a traffic study and decide we need it now, this isn't saying we have to wait on Wasatch Ritchie. Remember, the Wasatch Ritchie's only the little trigger part. It says when they're done, we have to, then Red Ledges has to move forward. Put that aside. The rest of this says that in 2019, we take a look at it, we do a traffic study if we want, whatever we want to do, but if we still have a road to nowhere, it's no different in 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, why still ask Red Ledges to have a road to nowhere? Frankly, if I see them nearing the completion of Red Ledges, to where maybe there isn't an incentive to do the road anymore, then I think you start talking about a bond or a final date or whatever. But you've got quite a few years left to build out, right? So I'm saying in favor of Red Ledges, why have them do a road they don't need to? But I'm saying I feel personally strong that whenever Wasatch Ritchie comes on, they need to do it.
And I agree with that, only because every car that comes, if Red Ledges builds, and any car that's coming down Center Street going north, it's not going to take Center and Main Street and takes the Red Ledges bypass, has to go on Coyote Lane or in front of J.R. Smith Elementary. And I think that's doing a disservice to Valley Hills and to that area to have a road that's going to attract traffic from the east to dump out on the road that could go down Center Street and Main Street. I think that can accommodate it better. So I do feel it's important to have that lower piece in place before we try to filter extra traffic through those neighborhoods. And Coyote Lane, that's not a good place to be filtering more traffic, I don't think, at this point.
Before I did this, I conferred one time or another with each of the council on comments. And the road to nowhere, why do we need it? What about a little more teeth into what happens if you don't do it? Concerns that I've heard from Todd, and frankly some calls I've had from the community that say, why do you just keep letting them do it? Well, if we don't need a road, we don't need a road. So I'll answer those to the community. We don't need it, so I don't want to pressure on it. But I just I guess to say, let's just trust us, we plan to build this when 3 different times you've come in and asked for extensions, and this time you haven't funded the deadline for October. So I just think, I don't mind giving you all the time you need up to a point which a future council can weigh in on. And not have a hard date, maybe it would be quicker than that if Bassett Ritchie, but if not, as long as I'm here, we look at things, maybe a traffic study, but you keep getting another year's extension. I frankly feel like I've tried to incorporate comments I've heard from everyone, and including plenty from Todd, but it can't, you know, we don't get into legal issues. We haven't brought in the connectivity, which some of the city wants. I haven't done any of that because maybe those are legal issues we shouldn't get into.
So you're saying then on number 4 that the connection road is the Bassett Ritchie Road instead of this connection point?
Well, there's 2 pieces to the Red Hills, the Red Ledges. There's the bypass and the connection piece. Those are the, it goes up the side and across the top of Stone.
So you're just calling it that, it's still the
It's
same.
It's still the same road, but Todd kept calling it that, and I asked him the same thing, and he says, well, they're a little different.
Under the interlocal agreement, they actually.
They talked to him about
different
each of them.
things.
Okay,
The
so
bypass connection
see,
road.
I thought that was the connection road to Stone Creek one, but you're saying it's not, just.
No, it's,
East-west piece at the top.
It's just a,
Maybe that
it's
should
in
be
the interlocal
it
agreement.
should. That's a good clarification.
2 different chunks of road, you
Yeah,
know.
that's a
There's
good
still
point.
issues about connectivity, the retention pond, all those things lead to you guys to fight over, I guess, and I don't think we ought to get in the middle of it. This doesn't do that. This just says when we need a road, we want a road, and until we need a road, we don't, and we weigh in on it to see where we're at each year after 3 years. That's all this does.
I guess from our side, the biggest concern I would have is what I've expressed in the past meeting, and that was if Bassett Ritchie comes in and they install it all this year, that puts us in a real pinch.
I understand,
And that's, that,
but no less a pinch than if we stay with this year, right?
I'm sorry?
But no less a pinch than we stay with October 2016. That'd be a real pinch.
I agree with that. I guess,
They couldn't even do it until they get, I mean, what's the earliest they could do it feasibly? Because the sewer and all, I mean,
Probably
at least 2 years, I can't even imagine that it would be.
Well, you get the water line in first before that.
yeah, water line could be put in 2 months.
And that's probably what we're most anxious to even move forward, to get that part in, right? But that's part of this, it's in here.
I guess my only request would be to keep the 3-year minimum because, again, it's not really an extension. If we're saying, well, no matter what Bassett Ritchie does, you gotta go ahead right away. And if for some reason that we don't foresee, they happen to get it all in this year, then all of a sudden I'm doing it right away. So I think if we could just keep that 3-year minimum, I really like the idea that you have here. It surprises me a lot. I guess my second comment was I'd love to have my attorney review the language and make sure he's okay with it, because we haven't reviewed any of this. So
Neither's ours, I guess.
What we'd like to do, Todd, is bring it back to council and take a vote on the motion, and if they agree, we take it back to legal counsel, and if we get clarification, we come back and they work the finer details.
Would anyone be willing to amend it to keep in the 3-year minimum? Would be my
Isn't
only-
that in here?
No, he's taking that out.
The trigger is immediate whenever, but honestly, Todd, we discussed this, you really don't, maybe it's just a thing with you and your owners, but if we don't do this at all, you say it doesn't give you much of an extension. Well, we're granting an extension. We're not getting anything far, we're just seeing that we don't need the road yet, but we do need it when there's a connection to it through Bassett Ritchie. But if they were in here, they came to planning, they do this, that, and the other to build a bunch of homes, it's going to take months for them to get any approval, and then we're going to say build a road. By now, it'll probably be 2017, won't it?
Yeah, but again, that's not much of an extension if we're starting to build in 2017, because you're saying that under your language, it has to be started the same time they start.
And finish the same time they do, and I hope you're at least as capable of Bassett Ridge.
I
If they can
think,
build theirs, I hope you can build yours.
I think we are, but again, I get back to it's really not much of an extension if for some reason they come in and get it all done. And I'll disagree with you on one point. You say that once theirs is in, it's needed. That's not necessarily true. I agree that it ought to be close to the time that they put it in. But from a traffic perspective, it's not going to be needed
Well, that's
for
the
3
same.
years, 4 years, 5 years.
I apologize. That's the same argument we had the last city meeting where if you don't do yours, they're gonna say, why do we need ours? Because Red Edges isn't done, and then you get to say, well, but theirs isn't done. And I guess
And I'm not
when they
proposing
come,
that.
when they come for approval of another phase, you could help them argue that theirs isn't needed either. As long as we don't make them, we aren't making you. So help them with
I
that.
don't want to get involved in what they're doing.
Let's just amend it, we'll put some data in.
If someone wants to amend it, that's
Driven by a study then, I mean,
Well, I'm just saying, are we talking about people's opinion of whether it's needed or not? Or are we going to say, look, we have a study, and you're showing us that it's not?
All Todd, if I can
Yeah,
understand, all he's asking for is an amendment that the trigger won't come for 3 years. And any of you can make that amendment, I'm not going to, but any of you can.
Do you feel like the rest of this is acceptable as Ron's?
I believe so.
Outside of that one thing.
Yeah, I believe so. I again, just kind of want to run the wording by our attorney and maybe we can tweak it and make everybody happy. At face value, it seems just fine.
so Todd, you're saying that you agree with 1.2, where the city can choose to withhold further phase approvals if that deadline is not met?
Well, again, I haven't seen all the language, so I'd love to actually read it once.
Sure.
That'd be spectacular.
How long do you think you'll need?
Usually we get these in the staff report beforehand, we can read it and analyze it.
How long do you think you'll need to run that by your group?
Well, you know what, if you would like, we could take 10 minutes, I could read it, I could actually call somebody, you could take the next item on the agenda and we could come back and vote on it. I don't know if that's normal and doable.
Here it is. All the changes are in there.
I want to make you feel you're comfortable. I don't want to push you. If we can, as a council, approve and go back and let your staff look at that and then ask for a recommendation change, I don't want to put you in a position where you sign something, read something, and you haven't really had a thorough thought of looking through what you disagree.
Sure. I think I could have an answer for you in about 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay?
Amazing. You think you get service like that?
Maybe we can
We
get
aim to please.
Well, let's, we've got a motion, we'll take a little spot. You go get some information back, what you need. We'll put a hold on the motion, and we'll get some information back to the
So
council.
we table it to the end of the agenda or whatever.
We'll keep the motion live.
Are we getting your public comment?
Yeah.
Don't you think that our staff should also look at this, such as BART?
What?
And don't you think this should be
Yeah.
discussed at perhaps an agenda prep meeting before, I just think that.
Well, it's up to the council. I'd like to see a motion on the table. What I want to do is either you can say yes or no.
Jesus.
And if you say no, you can take it back to the work meeting, which I think that probably might be a better
Yeah.
solution, so both sides can have a chance to look at what's in depth, what's in that agreement. to change.
Well, I have a motion on the table on our group with a second. I would be willing, it isn't up to me. Somebody can make a motion to table my motion so that it stands as given. And then when it's come off the table, any amendments that could be proffered that you want to. I think it's important you give Todd the guidance. If you're gonna, in the discussion 2 weeks ago, there was no limit of 3 years that he had. There was a trigger immediately. And I'm not gonna amend that. One of you can. But before he goes talks to his bosses, he needs to know whether that's in there or not. He added that. The city did not in their version. So that's something different Todd's brought to us.
The idea of the immediate trigger, I didn't think that was his idea.
No. He's saying there will be no trigger for 3 years.
I was saying there's a minimum time period.
That's the amendment
At
he
least
would
3
like.
years. The rest of it, I think sounds okay. I agree, there's a motion on the table, it probably ought to be voted on. I'm just asking for a few minutes to analyze something that's totally new to us and make a call.
Let's take that state council to continuation on the item on the motion. We'll go for that one time. We can go back and talk about it and then back to the motion back up.
Yeah, we'll just do that, we'll table it.
Yeah, I'd like to
How
make a
we do
motion
that.
that we table this until
He gets back.
another meeting. Or until he wants to get back, but I do think our staff needs to look at it, so I can put the table for another meeting.
Motion to table it for continuation for another meeting by Councilmember Franco.
Okay, I'll second it.
Second by Councilmember Todd for continuation. Any discussion on the motion has been stated?
I have some discussion.
Yeah, you have to actually make the council.
Sure.
All those in favor say aye.
I,
Aye.
3 ayes, Jeff. Nay. Motion carries for continuation for another meeting. Item 1A, Councilman's Branch. But I would like to maybe go with some information back and bring it back, maybe bring it to the council if we want to change it.
There's no reason we can't take this off the table at the very next city meeting. I don't know what advice, what, public notification that requires to come off the table. You should have time in 2 weeks. Mark Smedley can weigh in, other city staff, and we'll bring it off the table and it could be amended or left as is.
and public comment,
And public comment tonight and in 2 weeks.
So what we'll do, put it back in another regular meeting. Well, when it comes to work meeting or the regular meeting, council.
Fine, with a regular meeting, that's
That's
where
a
it's
regular
tabled.
meeting.
And so go back on the regular meeting after staff reviewed it. You've had a chance to review it with your people, and then go back to the meeting.
I could be totally wrong on this, but I've always understood that once you have a motion on the table, that one actually has to be voted on before you can vote on another one. Am I wrong on that?
Well,
We're not voting on another one, we
yeah,
tabled.
they tabled the motion on it, so they voted back into it. They amended his motion. Council, you can do, his up here, one came underneath to charge and took the other down.
Okay,
Just table it to the next meeting.
okay, I understand.
Thanks. And then we'll have this gentleman come up just for a few
Yes,
minutes. Please come up to the mic if you're going to speak. State your name.
My name is Rich Hanson. If I understand it's going to table, but we take public comment now.
I would like to begin.
Rick?
Hello again. I'm Rick McCloskey, I'm representing Stone Creek right now, and say hello to the council members and everyone else we've met with numerous times. Frankly, I'm not sure how to proceed based on this discussion that's taking place, but I guess one thing we want to do is express that it seems that Stone Creek has been left out of these conversations and considerations in terms of the bypass road and whether or not it's needed and who benefits and who doesn't. And I think that maybe it's worth just a real brief history. When this all came about in 2007, we had a project that had been approved through the Planning Commission. Most of you know this, so I'm sorry to regurgitate it, but at that time in January 2007, we were preparing to go to the City Council for final approval. That's the project that we had approved. We were expecting to be in construction in the early spring of 2007. Shortly after we got approved at the Planning Commission, the city and Red Ledge approached us to help them with an easement for a bypass road. My understanding is the county was requiring this bypass road to alleviate traffic on the east side, and they were making Red Ledges provide this bypass road, and Red Ledges needed a way to connect that over to Mill Road and eventually on to Highway 40. So we agreed after some weeks of discussion and negotiations to go ahead and throw this away and start over. negotiations and discussions, we came up with this plan. And if you'll notice, the only accesses to this project were off the bypass and connector roads. The other access points were all closed. The one in the middle at the end of 1300 East was going to be a crash gate. This was going to be a private community and only access off of the connection, off of the bypass and connection road. This was what was mutually agreed upon between all the parties, the city and Red Ledges. We also agreed to the road design, the intersection there at 580 North. In fact, you can go ahead and pull up the latest plat 2015. So on the left-hand side there, the connection at 580 North, that was always intended and expected to connect to the bypass road. It was part of the original drawings. We even have construction drawings that show that connection at that point. It's now been brought up and made a big point that easement was never granted. We believe that was an oversight. When I asked Todd about that recently, he agreed that it was an oversight, but now it's an issue. That's not what we're here to discuss tonight, but we do agree with that the city has every right to ask that easement be granted. I would remind the council that they're asking for an extension. This is the 4th extension. They've already been extended 8 years. They're asking for 5 more. That would be a total of 13 years. It's completely reasonable that the city could ask for a few things in return. And that connection at 580 North has always been anticipated. It's in the drawings, and it seems that that could be part of it. The other thing that we're particularly interested in, this affects, we believe, the Stone Creek development, the homeowners that will live there, as well as the homeowners in the existing subdivision along Mill Road in 1300. What we call on the bottom of that drawing, about 200 feet between Mill Road and our northwest connection. That was always intended to be, at least in the initial construction phases of our project, that was going to be our main entrance. At the time, the 675 North access was eliminated. We actually had a lot, as you can see, behind that road. But as you know, those of you who were here over the summer, there were neighbors that requested that we open up those stub roads. We reluctantly agreed to do that, but we did. And we discussed the fact that we were going to have this main access point off of Mill Road technically at the top of our project, but on the map here it shows the bottom. And we felt like it was maybe redundant to have both of those access points. Our feeling from the standpoint of beginning the development, we now have approval to do phase 1 as the city agreed to let us connect to the existing water line while this other water line easement is worked out. But we would like the city to ask that 200-foot section of the road be built. That's probably less than $200,000. It's intended to be that way. The landscaping, there'll be, Stone Creek has agreed to landscape what used to be the Erickson's piece, now it's the Wilcox's, and also the Piscatellis. And there'll be some fencing and berming, and so that's a much less intrusive entrance through the neighborhood into the project. It would be our intent to funnel all of our construction traffic and eventually sales traffic through that connection there onto our road. If we don't get that, then that 675 north piece becomes our main entrance. And those two neighbors, particularly that live there, would have all of the construction traffic and all of the sales traffic and everything coming through that connection. So we're asking that the council require that 200-foot piece be built as part of an agreement for an extension. And for what it's worth, we offered this to Red Ledges, and we offered, understanding that they've expressed the financial burden that this road could be, we've offered to finance that at a very nominal interest rate over 5 years. And they have not, as a fact, they haven't accepted that, we've actually rejected that. But we are trying to make this work for everybody's sake. We think that this is in the best interest of the neighbors. It also helps the city establish that the road's actually going to be built someday, because a piece of it's actually built. It's a relatively, it's like 4% of the entire road. It's relatively inexpensive. It helps the Stone Creek project. It helps the local neighbors. And we feel that this ought to be part of what is granted in an extension.
What we'd like to do, the recommendation of Rick is to present it to the city council, to the Tony there, and if you get it by Monday by 1:30, then we'll run it to the council on a work meeting. So just on an agenda item that you'd like to add to the agenda, let the council discuss it. So the proposal you have tonight, present it to staff, and then we'll put it on the agenda.
And we'd like to point out, we're honestly, we're trying not to have this be adversarial for Red Ledges. I say we, I'm no longer an owner. Most of you know I lost my ownership in the project, but I'm working with the owners to try to help get this thing developed. They're the ones that have made the offer to finance this at a low interest rate, so that it's a minimal financial burden. It helps our project, helps begin the road, and it especially helps the neighbors. So we'll make that proposal.
If you get to them for 1:30, stick it on the agenda prep meeting schedule, and we'll let us from there.
Sir, that's a good question. I thought that you had lost your edge home buyer. Who is the other
Oh, we
owner?
did. We don't have, well, there's, when I say owners, the people that bought this out of the situation that I was in with the financial institution. I personally lost this years ago.
Okay.
So the folks that bought it, Rich Hanson's one of them,
Okay.
and Ross Stokes. They own it in Blackstone. I think it's called Blackstone LLC. They own it. It was for sale, and it was under contract with Edge Homes most of last year. And the reason that fell out of contract is because we couldn't get the water line resolved.
Are you talking about the Blackstone investment
No.
out of,
What do you guys call it?
I wish we were that.
you say, wow.
No, it's, I think, what is it called?
Blackstone Capital.
Blackstone. They're just,
That's a good advertisement. We're gonna move on from that.